Allora ragazzi, nuovo video di Laura Fryer, la nostra cara, adorata Laura Fryer, che ci fa sempre molto piacere ascoltare. Ultimamente non sono sempre d'accordo con lei, ma sono comunque delle opinioni molto interessanti da una veterana del settore, una molto onesta e non ideologica e molto normale, molto corporate se vogliamo, ma trovo sorprendentemente utile. È uno dei miei canali YouTube preferiti perché riguarda il gaming da un po' di tempo a questa parte. Il video di oggi è un po', chiamiamolo fuori tema, però ho ritenuto che il contenuto fosse molto interessante perché parla di XDefiant, ma il video si chiama The Industry Unlearned Lessons. Vuol dire le lezioni non imparate dall'industria, e quindi non è che parla nello specifico del gioco, parla di ciò che il gioco significa per l'industria, e ho come l'impressione di aver annusato un po' il tema del video, però magari rimarrò sorpreso. Quindi, come sempre, ragazzi, ci cuffiamo, giù l'audio di sottofondo e passiamo al video. Con tanto di sottotitoli automatici, non si può fare altrimenti, ragazzi. E pronti? Vediamo.
Hostile detected. Weapons hot.
On May 21st, 2024, Ubisoft launched XDefiant, their free-to-play answer to Call of Duty. The early numbers were excellent, and it looked like it was going to be a hit.
A million in an hour?
E oltretutto io l'ho provato, ragazzi, pur da non amante del genere, mi è sembrato molto carino in realtà.
6 months later, they announced that the game would be shutting down in June of 2025, and that several game developers would be losing their jobs. On the surface, this looks confusing. How did a game with this much promise and this much attention go from hero to zero so quickly? Was it a lack of marketing support from the publisher? Was it because the game engine was bad? We'll likely never know exactly what happened, but after reviewing the clues, I wasn't surprised that XDefiant failed. One of the goals of the XDefiant team was to be very transparent with their community. So the executive producer posted information regularly on his X account and discussed the problems. For example, he said the following. In fact, I would say something remarkable happened with this game, in that although we had very little marketing, we still had the fastest acquisition of players in the first few weeks for a Ubisoft title, just from you guys all talking about and promoting the game. But unfortunately, with little to no marketing, especially after launch, we weren't acquiring new players after the initial launch. Every game developer complains about marketing, and there are challenges with marketing teams. But I don't think that was actually the issue with XDefiant. You see, they had something like 1 million players in the first 3 hours. They had plenty of people trying the game. And when you have that many people trying the game and then leaving, it's not a marketing
In effetti
problem.
è strano.
It's the
Io un'idea
game.
me la sono fatta, mo sentiamo
The
lei.
issues within the game were bad enough that people left and didn't come back. For example, they had a lot of issues with their matchmaking system, and it wasn't skill-based when they first released.
How does XDefiant cater to both FPS pros, you know, the sweats, and casual players?
Well, the way we've been handling it is by mixing them all up in the same playlist. We don't have skill-based matchmaking, so players, you get in the game old school, OG style. If you're not good, that's your opportunity to get better.
We made the same mistake with Gotham City Imposters. We didn't have skill-based matchmaking, and it turned out it was kind of a ticking time bomb. When everyone is first starting out, it's awesome. You find matches, and you're all pretty equal because you're learning the game together. Eventually, however, that wears off, and soon the less skilled players aren't having fun.
È così importante il
il
matchmaking skill-based? Cioè, mi viene in mente di sì, da certi punti di vista. Però tanti altri giochi di successo non ce l'hanno o non ce l'hanno avuto. Però magari è perché avevano già una fanbase.
With XDefiant, a few months after launch, they decided to fix this and added a ranked mode. Sadly, that didn't go over well either. Within a day of release, one Reddit user dubbed the mode a hilarious train wreck. Their post specifically called out the lack of penalty for quitters games starting without full lobbies and the absence of solo matchmaking.
COD l'ha tolto dopo anni di richieste dei
There were
giocatori.
also complaints
Ok.
about balance and
Aspetta a te se
progression.
inserirlo meno ora.
Some people
Ok.
wish there were more modes, but these were minor compared to the issue with hit registration. You see, the game wasn't able to detect if you were getting hit with bullets. And that's pretty important for a game like this. Of course, it's
Davvero?
also a very
Questa non la
well understood
sapevo.
issue. One of the first games
Ok,
I worked on
questa
was
è
called Fighter Ace. It was
gravissima in
developed by
realtà.
a company called
Cioè ti passa
VR1, and it was
immediatamente la voglia di
Microsoft's first
giocare.
massively multiplayer game.
E non solo
I
se
was
sei
working as the
uno
publishing
piuttosto
producer.
competitivo, anche se sei uno piuttosto casualone.
It started as an arcade flight game, so you can kind of think of it as Quake in the sky. And at that time, it was 1997, so we didn't have broadband. You had to connect to the game over a modem. And believe me, the latency and connection issues were much worse than they are today. Like XDefiant, we had a client-server architecture, and we had to use tricks to deal with packet loss. Without getting too detailed, the trick is to make the game experience that the player is seeing and feeling awesome on their client while you're waiting for the server to tell you the truth. Because at the end of the day, the server is running the actual simulation. It is ground truth for what's happening in the game. This means that as you're waiting on the player's machine, you're extrapolating or guessing what is happening on the client until you hear from the server. The server is running the actual simulation of the game, and once they tell the client machine the truth, the game smoothly moves the player back into reality. If you don't handle it well, it can be a terrible experience for the player. They can get shot without being aware of that. They can think they shot and killed someone, but they didn't actually. They can even die unexpectedly. It can be incredibly frustrating. Mark Rubin wrote the following about the
Questa
issue, and he
quantità
blamed
di
it on
problemi
resources.
tecnici
We had other
non
issues,
me la
though, as well,
ricordavo.
that we
Ma
tried to
quando
be
l'ho provato io non
transparent
funzionava
about.
così male,
For one,
anzi.
we had crippling tech debt using an engine that wasn't designed for what we were doing, and we didn't have the engineering resources to ever correct that. When I was at Xbox, I helped kick off a shared game engine that was eventually called XNA. As part of that research, I went through and read every game postmortem I could get my hands on, and I created a list of common issues that every game developer on projects complains about. Game developers never feel they have enough people. So saying you don't have enough resources on a game, that's not really a good answer. You need to dig deeper to see why it was you didn't have enough resources, or maybe if you had the wrong resources. It's just not very helpful to say you didn't have enough, because you never have enough. From what I've seen,
Questo è
it looks
interessante.
like the team had a pretty clear idea of what they wanted to build. They wanted to make a Call of Duty killer. So they must have known that the engine wasn't really built for what they needed. I mean, as you just saw with the client-server architecture, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and if the engine didn't support
Heidi,
it,
grazie.
they would have needed to figure out how to resource that work, and not at the end of the project. So my question is, why didn't they resolve these issues earlier? They could have switched engines, or they could have acquired the resources up front. Did they not know? I mean, I guess that's possible. But it's also possible they never put together a plan. This is one of the classic mistakes I've seen game developers make. They don't spend any time planning. And if you don't plan out your project, you don't know what the risks are. And if you don't know what the risks are, you can't mitigate them. I like planning, but not everyone sees planning as an exciting part of game making. I think people make games because they want to design something cool, a new system, or maybe they want to make this great character. They don't want to sit down and plan out how long it's going to take. That's boring. And if you don't practice estimating, you don't get good at it because it's a skill. It's a discipline that requires practice. Look, estimates don't have to take a lot of time. The purpose of doing an estimate is to give you a general idea of how many resources you're going to need, generally how long it's going to take to make. But at the same time, it's there to illuminate issues that you probably haven't thought through yet. So I'm not sure what the XDefiant team did, but if
Questa
I had
cosa
been
mi lascia
working on this
sempre un
project,
sacco
I would have
basito.
put together options for making the game on the current engine, which is called Snowdrop.
Io non pensavo
Then I would have had the team
fosse
put
così.
together an estimate for how long it was going to take to update the engine to make XDefiant. Additionally, I would have worked with the engineers to figure out if we needed any key hires. Were there people we needed to bring on? And if so, by what date? I mean, having someone start on day one on the client server architecture would have been a great idea. So were there resources needed for that? And also, did anyone account for the supporting resources, like people from recruiting, that would be needed in order to hire all of the talented individuals that we would need to make it happen? Putting all of that together would have given you the first option. This is the option of making XDefiant on the Snowdrop engine. My next step would be to look at all the other engines within Ubisoft and figure out if they would work and what it would take to make them work. And finally, I would then look at external engines like Unreal. Of course, there are costs with switching engines. You do have to train people on the new tech. But if you're effectively rewriting large portions of your own engine, you might find that it's not as costly as you think. Also, when you're trying to hire new people, it's a lot easier to find people who have worked on Unreal or Unity than it is to find people who have worked on your proprietary tech.
E questa è una dinamica che ormai abbiamo sentito un sacco di volte.
And we pick our recommendation. The option that looked most likely to succeed based on all of the factors. Then we take that to executive management and secure our resources. And this is where it often falls down, because as the team leader, you have to get management to make the hard decisions. You have to get them discussing the options, understanding what the trade-offs are, and eventually saying, yes, we're going to do this, and yes, here are the resources, we're going to supply them to you. And a lot of times these discussions aren't that fun, and they can be really difficult, and so maybe it didn't happen. It's possible that the team didn't want to be upfront about the difficulty of making the game. Some people want to get you into the project before telling you the true cost, because they know that once you're in, it's much harder to walk away. This is what's called the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that a company or organization is more likely to continue with a project if they have already invested a lot of money, time, or effort in it, even when continuing is not the best thing to do. When I was leading the AR project at Oculus, now Meta, I encountered what I think was this problem. Mark Zuckerberg wanted an AR headset as fast as possible, and some of the researchers were telling him that the headset could ship in 2022. My years of experience told me that was crazy, and my product team agreed. We knew it wasn't going to happen, so I decided to work with the research team and the product team to put together what I call a work-back schedule. A work-back schedule is where you take the date that you desire to have the product done, and then you work back from that to create a rough estimate showing when things would have to be done in order to make the date.
Lei ha una capacità di spiegare con semplicità delle cose molto professionali.
You're going to have to get that hardware out and into the hands of content creators several months in advance so they can make content, so you have something for players to experience on launch day. From my perspective, I wanted to build this work-back schedule so that we were all aware of what we were building and how long it might take. There were many unsolved problems, of course, but even looking at the defined areas, we were well past the desired date. Long story short, I wasn't able to get the researchers to work with the product team to put this together. And the Meta executives had very little hardware experience, so they bought the Hopium. Fast forward to today, and we can see that the product team was right. The AR project I was working on was codenamed Orion, and it was shown in 2024 as a prototype, a full 2 years after the researchers said it would be a finished project.
Tra l'altro ho sentito parlare molto bene degli occhiali di Meta.
Clearly, it was not a hard call on my part to say that it wasn't going to make 2022. But why wouldn't the researchers agree with that? Why wouldn't they take the time to admit the truth? My conclusion was that the researchers were literally fighting for their lives. They were afraid that if Mark Zuckerberg knew how long it was going to take, that he would cancel the project, that they would no longer get to do the research that they were passionate about. So is this what happened with XDefiant? Were they worried that they wouldn't get approval for the project if the management at Ubisoft knew the true costs? We know the people on the team were aware of the engine problem. Did they hide that? Did they present optimistic plans, assuming they would get more time later and could fix the problems then? It's possible because apparently they did get more time.
Okay.
According to Insider Gaming, the game was supposed to launch in 2021, but was given more time after the Tom Clancy brand was dropped. Insider Gaming understands that the game's netcode is still a significant issue for the project, and the team has recently been struggling to reach the internal goal of 100 players per server partition, a goal desired to support the expected hundreds of thousands of players that will play the game on launch. It's one of the major reasons for this past weekend's closed playtests. And here we come to another clue. Server scalability. Even when you're hosting servers on the cloud, it can get very expensive if you don't have enough players per server. In fact, it's so expensive that it can end up killing a deal, which is exactly what happened with Vanguard. Vanguard was the second massively multiplayer game I worked on, and it was made by Sigil, and it was supposed to be the spiritual successor to EverQuest. I joined the game after Microsoft had already spent millions of dollars, and I discovered that the developer hadn't made any progress on scaling the servers to handle multiple clients. Remember, back then these big server farms, they didn't exist. Azure didn't exist. You had to buy the servers and maintain them yourself. And it turned out that this was going to be Microsoft's responsibility. We were going to have to build and maintain every single server. So having servers that were scalable, that could handle multiple clients, was really important because it was going to get very expensive. So I met with the Sigil team and I told them that we needed to start addressing this issue every milestone. Since they were the experts, the people doing the work, and they knew their code, I asked them to put this together, and I told them they could make them any numbers they wanted, whatever they thought they could achieve. My only request of them was that we had to start showing progress every milestone. So the first milestone after we came up with this plan, they show up with a build, we test it, and they completely fail. They did not hit their own goal. So of course, the business people on the project said, we're not paying for that milestone. Well, this led to a complete meltdown by the leaders at Sigil. My boss had gone on maternity leave, so Phil Spencer and I had to hop on a plane and go down and meet with them. They were so mad that they put Phil and I in a conference room, and then they came in and they took Phil away and they left me sitting in that conference room all day. They didn't want to talk to me.
It never ends.
I was pretty
Minchia.
upset because if you
Che
recall,
dinamiche.
I was also working on Gears of War and they were wasting a lot of my time. I don't have time to fly to California and sit in a room when I'm trying to ship 2 products. So yeah, that wasn't the best. Not long after this incident took place, Microsoft and Sigil agreed to part ways. From my perspective, this was a good thing for both parties because we were definitely not aligned. Paying for servers is expensive, so if XDefiant didn't address this problem, it's easy to understand that the cost of running the game might have been too much, and that may be part of why it was shut down. My question is, why didn't they address the server issue and the tech debt when they were given more time? They clearly knew they had these problems. Well, according to Insider Gaming, there was a group of out-of-touch executives nicknamed the Boys Club, even though the club apparently included men and women, and this club made unnecessary changes. The issue with the Boys Club isn't that its managers or directors were telling developers what to do. After all, that's their job. But it's the lack of work ethic, unpleasant behavior, and the egos from these individuals that have created a really unhealthy place to work. One member has no design experience or people experience and has been given directorial powers because of personal friendships, said one source.
Ah, che bello. Che
A group
la
of
ricetta per il
out-of-touch and
successo proprio.
inexperienced game leaders making bad decisions, unfortunately, is not a news story. And it is probably the single biggest reason the game was shut down. It's possible they weren't even aware of the issues in their game until they put it in front of people. If you're ignoring your team's feedback, that can happen. And it's a shame, because a bunch of the developers lost their jobs over it, and Ubisoft wasted millions of dollars that they could have spent on other games. All industries seem to have this problem, but I think in games it's worse. I think in games it's worse because it's a fun industry. So it attracts a bunch of people who are more interested in the view and not in the climb. It attracts people that don't take the time to learn from the past mistakes of the people that came before them. They don't want to do the boring work of understanding the path ahead of them. They don't want to read about client-server architecture and how long it's going to take to implement, right? They want to design things. They want to do interviews. Making a game is never easy because it's a creative endeavor. Making something fun means you'll always have unknowns, but that's why you plan. That's why you estimate, because you have to make sure you have the knowns under control so that you can
Questo video mi sta
accommodate
sorprendendo
the
perché non mi
unknowns.
aspettavo questo tono di cose.
The one really
Mi
bright
aspettavo un
spot
discorso
for me
diverso.
about XDefiant
Completamente
is
in
them
realtà.
being so open and transparent with their audience, with their fans.
We have been community first since day one. Literally, when we wrote up our first deck, it was like the pillars were be good at shooter, be good with the community.
And I applaud Mark Rubin and the XDefiant team for being transparent about the problems on the game. I think many of their fans were very startled and disappointed when Ubisoft shut them down. But I'm hopeful that the lessons that they shared will help other game developers. Because at the end of the day, it didn't have to be this way. A lot of these lessons had already been learned. And I'm hopeful that we as an industry will pay attention and do better.
Questo è
We've
uno...
heard you and we completely agree. It is not okay for ranked games to begin when there are not 8 players present.
Ok, allora ragazzi, questo è uno di quei video che testimonia perché adoro Laura Fryer. È proprio il suo stile, il motivo per cui mi sono così affezionato a lei e al suo canale, che ha questa capacità di spiegare delle cose dal punto di vista veramente molto professionale, molto corporate di sviluppo di delle cose con una semplicità, professionalità, proprio limpidezza imbarazzante che rende le cose comprensibili praticamente a chiunque, pur parlando di dinamiche che sono molto al di dentro dell'industria. Nella fattispecie questo video mi ha veramente sorpreso perché vi dico che cosa pensavo che avrei trovato in questo video. XDefiant a me, per me che l'ho provato giusto 2 o 3 volte giusto per provarlo, a me era sembrato in realtà molto valido, molto convincente, cioè uno shooting decente, un buon movimento, insomma mi sembrava valido. E oltretutto non ero l'unico a pensarlo, perché inizialmente, e l'ha detto pure nel video, inizialmente la risposta dei giocatori è stata molto buona, no? Cioè numeri piuttosto alti, però poi è crollata in maniera terrificante. Io pensavo, dopo aver avuto un pochino di esperienza diretta e visto quanto i giocatori si stavano buttando inizialmente su questo gioco anche durante le beta, che il potenziale ci fosse, ma che avesse fallito perché non offriva niente di davvero diverso e significativo rispetto ad altri sparatutto che erano più blasonati, e quindi se fai qualcosa di troppo simile, perché mai le persone dovrebbero giocare con il tuo gioco? Vanno altrove, ma il gioco di per sé era valido. E invece scopro da questo video che c'erano dei problemi veramente molto concreti, molto importanti, molto tecnici, e che mi hanno lasciato un tantinello basito. Perché ancora una volta, come succede spesso nei video di Laura Fryer, quando ti mette in fila tutte quante queste cose che sono successe con questa chiarezza, tu sei lì che dici: oh mio Dio, ma com'è possibile che è successo questo? Perché queste sono delle cose assolutamente sane e basilari, eppure continuano ad accadere all'interno dell'industria, e le ha spiegate tutte quante dall'inizio alla fine. E in realtà quindi si è scoperto che XDefiant invece aveva un sacco di problemi, a partire dall'engine, dal codice di per sé, dai problemi che c'erano in cose assolutamente fondamentali per uno shooter, poi problemi con i server, i problemi di design, la dirigenza e tutta una serie di cose che sono molto più tipiche di un prodotto che tende a essere fallimentare. Quindi non era esattamente come immaginavo io. No, neanche un po', era radicalmente diversa dalla percezione che avevo avuto io all'inizio. E sapete una cosa, ragazzi? Questo in realtà rende la cosa persino peggiore. Sapete perché? Perché dimostra che nonostante tutti i problemi, questo gioco in realtà credito da parte dei giocatori ce l'ha avuto, e anche lato sviluppatori in parte. L'atteggiamento che Laura Fryer stessa ha lodato di voler ascoltare molto la community e cercare di migliorare le cose da certi punti di vista e vedere ciò che i giocatori vogliono, in realtà era presente. Il problema era praticamente tutto il resto. E questo in realtà rende le cose ancora peggiori, perché Maledizione non è un gioco che aveva delle carte in regola ma a cui nessuno ha dato abbastanza fiducia da avere perlomeno la possibilità di dimostrare di che cosa era capace. No, a questo gioco i giocatori in realtà credito gliel'hanno dato, e come all'inizio. Anche più forse di quanto si meritasse, considerando quello che questo video ha mostrato. E l'hanno sprecato. Hanno sprecato tutto questo credito e buona fede iniziale che i giocatori hanno avuto nei confronti di questo gioco qui, riuscendo a fallire in un ambito in cui in realtà avevi un po' il coltello dalla parte del manico, perché la cosa più importante, ovvero la discussione, il passaparola, il feedback positivo dei giocatori, in realtà all'inizio ce l'avevi. E però hai fatto le cose male, e la cosa non ha funzionato colpevolmente, e questo è, mio Dio, è testimonianza di una mala gestione interna di Ubisoft che va molto al di là della semplice scarsa lungimiranza nel realizzare un prodotto che in realtà differisce troppo poco rispetto ai competitor. Capite che cosa intendo? La mia spiegazione era questa, a quanto pare invece non era questa. I giocatori ci si erano buttati sul gioco, i giocatori stavano dando credito al gioco, ma è stata Ubisoft a sprecare questo credito, con una mala gestione interna e delle decisioni insensate prese all'interno del gioco. Non necessariamente colpa del team di sviluppo in senso stretto, ma a volte colpa della dirigenza, è colpa di aver pensato male certe cose fin dall'inizio, o magari andando avanti. No, non è che si è scoperto che era un cacatone subito dopo, è che all'inizio vivi in una sorta di luna di miele, però dei problemi ci sono. Ma a quanto pare questi problemi erano troppo radicali, troppo fondativi e affrontati troppo male per far sì che potessero essere risolti, e in breve tempo i giocatori sono andati via, tutti quanti. E in tempo zero si è arrivati al punto in cui il gioco, una volta lanciato, aveva troppo poca utenza. Molto poca, molto velocemente. E 6 mesi dopo il rilascio è stato chiuso. È triste come cosa, però, come ha detto giustamente Laura Fryer, è testimonianza di cose che vengono costantemente sottovalutate all'interno dell'industria, e lei ha questa meravigliosa capacità di raccontarle, e quello che dico sempre io quando mi riferisco a lei, la rivoluzionaria normalità che trasmette. Quanto mi piacerebbe che lei, probabilmente è tipo ritirata eccetera, non so se sta sviluppando qualcos'altro, se è coinvolta, non ne ho benché minima idea, però servirebbero persone come lei secondo me, per quanto ne voglio capire. Comunque ragazzi, fatemi sapere anche voi che cosa ne pensate. Io trovo che i suoi video siano sempre molto molto interessanti e molto belli. Già.